Okay, thank you very much, Debbie. I am sharing my screen now. Okay, um, so I'm going to quickly, yet hopefully thoroughly, give you an overview of PDSAs. And if you have any questions, Debbie had volunteered to watch chat, so please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat window. Oop, and there we go. So we're going to do a Plan, Do, Study, Act overview. So Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, otherwise known as PDSA cycles, is a, as you might imagine, 4-step process for generating small improvements iteratively over time. So in the first phase, you would plan, you set an intention of what are we going to try to change, what do we think will happen, and how are we going to measure whether or not what we thought would happen did happen. We're then going to go into the do phase where you do what you said you would do and you collect the data and you document your process. Study is where you analyze the data and you see if the data you collected during the do matches or does not match the predictions you made during the plan. And then lastly, you act. And in terms of act, you can decide whether or not to adapt your change idea further. If it's working very well reproducibly, then you might adopt it as a permanent practice. And if it's something you've been consistently struggling with, then you might abandon it and try a new idea. The PDSA cycles came about for several reasons. And one reason they came about in education is because they support disciplined inquiry. You figure out what are you going to do, what did you do, did it work, what are we going to do different, and you document every step of the process. For those of you who are new to PDSA, I want to impress upon you that PDSA is not rocket science. It's, and you learn the work by doing the work. It's more about a structure and an intentionality and a collective getting together than anything else. So you've got your discipline, and then the inquiry comes from the tests of change. We don't know what's going to work. We are going to test what's going to work. We assess our tests through the second key point here, which is that PDSA cycles are evidence-based. We make decisions based on measurable, reproducible data about change over time. Reproducible is important because different people will be testing their ideas at different sites, and we want to be able to see whether or not across sites they have change. We also want to do reproducible over time and make sure it wasn't just a fluke that it worked. Anything can work sometimes. We want to find things that will work many times. We also want them to be based on data, not opinion. Everyone has an opinion. Sometimes you might even have two. However, when we're looking at systematic change and systematic efforts, data scream. And so we want to make sure that we are collecting it and looking at it. And we also know why we are looking at it, which plays into the discipline from point one. Lastly, PDSA cycles are about rapid tests of change. It's about building and maintaining momentum to act, to try new things, to assess. And one of my favorite phrases is, we want to make good decisions quickly rather than perfect decisions never. It's very easy to sit around and to plan to act, and sometimes you can even sit around planning to plan. And PDSA is about having an idea that people agree is a worthy idea, and then figuring out whether or not it's going to work, not by sitting in an armchair, but by actually going and working with people. So I'm going to quickly walk through some of the key tasks of each phase, and certainly you can go back and look at these slides later to get a little bit more detail and reflection time. During the planning phase, you need to set a clear goal for the test, identify and document a specific change idea that is going to attempt to meet that goal. And a change idea needs to be something new, but it doesn't have to be something entirely new. It can be something that exists, which could be improved. So maybe you do it sometimes, but not always. Maybe some people do it always, but some people do it never. So you can build on past success. You don't have to think that you need an entirely new statement. You need to make a clear prediction. So what do you think is going to be the result of this? Because that clear prediction will then feed into what is your data collection plan using practical measures. So what are we going to measure to determine whether or not we met our prediction, which will determine whether or not we met our goal. And later on, we're going to talk about measures in just a couple of minutes. During the do phase, well, you do what you said you'd do. You then record what you did to see if you actually did it as you designed it. Importantly, you also document any notes, surprises, and obstacles, because often the unplanned can be even more informative than the planned. And the unexpected is also another form of data. So when you come across an unexpected surprise or an unexpected obstacle, that is itself important data. You also collect practical measures in alignment with your data collection plan. During the study phase, you merge the two. So was the goal of the test achieved? And importantly, how do you know? Did your predictions come true? And again, how do you know? You should have good answers to the how do you know question based on what you measured. You then reflect on what you learned from the test. And importantly, you ask yourself, does the PDSA team have a consensus about the above? Now, a consensus does not mean a unanimous complete agreement, yet it's important to understand that different people in different sites have different interpretations. And this is a feature, not a bug. This is why we do the work as a team, not as individuals. So if you have a consensus, that's interesting. And if you have different opinions, that's also interesting. And that might feed into your next PDSA cycle to maybe address that ambiguity. And then the final phase, act, you reflect on how can you overcome obstacles in the future. What opportunities do you discover and how do you leverage them? You don't just want to minimize the bad, you want to emphasize the good. What questions might you try to answer in your next cycle? And then, should you adapt, adopt, or abandon the change idea? So now let us talk about measurement. And I'm going to give you the key essentials of measurement. And I'm going to make some important distinctions. So first and foremost, PDSA measures should be practical. There is no such thing as a perfect measure. There is no such thing as unlimited time. You want to choose measures that you can easily integrate into your natural process, that are meaningful, and that are things that are not going to be an onerous burden. Remember, we are a rapid test of action-oriented change. So it needs to be rapid and it needs to be action-oriented. Importantly, PDSA measurement, I like to describe it as a system of small measures. Doing a large data collection can be very onerous, cumbersome, and might get in the way more than it helps you. So for PDSA measurement, often think of it as measuring many small things than trying to do one big measurement. And we'll see in the later examples how that might work. And lastly, PDSA measures should be actionable. Will knowing this help me do a better job next time? And if the answer is yes, might be a great measure. If the answer is no, you might think of something else. But again, if it's a small and practical measure and you're not sure if it's actionable, maybe you measure it anyway because it's small and it's practical. And then during the study phase, you can reflect, did this actually help us answer our questions? There are two important types of measures. One important type of measure is a process measure. So a process measure, as you might imagine, measures behavior and process. So did we implement the change idea as we intended? How did the students engage with the idea? Who did what, when, and with whom? That's one of my favorite questions for describing behavior. And those unexpected obstacles and surprises, what happened that we didn't expect? Do you have a measure that you can use to help you capture the unexpected? Lastly, or secondly, I should say, PDSA measurement should include outcome measures. So, did the change idea result in improvement? Or did we achieve our goal? Those are about the outcomes. Those are very important as well. And even though you're usually not testing the aim statement during a PDSA cycle, you should ask yourself, are we measuring something that would help us assess did the change idea maybe ultimately support our aim? So you won't be measuring the aim during a PDSA cycle, but you should be measuring those building blocks that get you there. The final distinction I want to make right now is proximal versus distal measures. So PDSA measurement should focus on proximal measures, and proximal means very close to you. It's in close proximity. So what are things you can collect yourself without help or without much help? What are things that you can influence quickly with your change idea? And what is information that you can act on to do different or better next time? So For example, the aim statement is likely something that you are not going to immediately influence yourself or immediately be able to act on during one PDSA cycle. It is a very important ultimate goal, yet within your immediate influence, you need to find some measures that you have more control over. PDSA measurement generally does not focus on distal measures, distal meaning in the distance. So the aim statement is in the distance. Something outside of your immediate sphere of influence is in the distance. And you want to generally not focus too much on things that are too far removed from your change idea to measure whether or not your change idea had a direct impact. So choose something close by. So I'm going to go through 1.5 examples. I'm looking at the time. 1.5 examples of past PDSA work that I've done with some colleagues. So one example was working with a large urban district on elementary English learner students in science. They had an aim statement for improving their science achievement for English learners. The driver we were focusing on was adding science language supports and more interactive learning activities during science lessons. The interaction giving students a chance to talk about it before they have to read or write about it. And their change ideas across multiple PDSA cycles were looking at evidence-based routines for introducing science vocabulary, using dyads and triads for interaction, intentional interaction during science lessons, and using a consistent structured lesson plan with a consistent structure of class discussions to help English learners understand expectations and talk moves and process more easily. The way that they measure, these are some of the measures that they ended up really liking. So the 2 process measures they really liked, so these teachers really liked clipboards. So sometimes they would print out their lesson plan, they'd put it on a clipboard, and they'd have a pen, and they'd use it as a checklist. If you remember Debbie's training, she said that she likes a checklist manifesto. These teachers loved using their lesson plans as a checklist. So did we do these tasks? Check, check, check. How much time did it take? So they wrote down transition time so they could see whether or not their pacing was matching their planning. And they also tracked during activities whether or not students were on topic, because a great task with students that are off topic, that doesn't really support student learning. They would also, depending on the change idea, have a class roster on their clipboard. And then when students were talking during whole class activities, they just tracked with very quick tally marks who talked and how many times, so that they could see whether or not the talk moves and the talk change ideas supported English learner students in participating with more equitably. Their outcome measures were very easy to integrate. So they would sometimes do exit tickets, so 3 quick questions about the science lesson, something students could do in a minute or less, and could be graded very quickly. And then they also did 20-second targeted reviews of science notebooks. So they had students turn their science notebooks already open to the right page and stack them on top of each other. And the teachers would set a very targeted 1 or 2 questions, and all they were going to look through in a science notebook was for those 1 or 2 questions. 20 seconds a notebook, 1 and done. You could do a 30-student class in 10 minutes and figure out how your class did on those 2 questions. So, these are all measures that were very close to the teacher, very close to the change idea, very close to the lesson, and very practical to implement. I'm not going to set up the second example, but I do want to just quickly run through their measures. So this was a study on literacy in middle school and high school, and the teachers really liked using vocabulary organizers. So they would track whether or not they did vocabulary activities per unit and how many times. They tracked how many times the teachers helped the students use their vocabulary organizers for another activity that was not explicitly about vocabulary. They also tracked when the students found it themselves and brought it out to help with an activity. And they also tracked time on task for their in-class reading and writing activities. So if they spent 20 minutes on in-class writing, was that time well spent? And then their outcome measures were a weekly vocab quiz. They would look at students' binders for vocabulary organizers. And what makes it an outcome measure is the accuracy, whereas earlier it's just were they using it. And then lastly, they found it easy to embed some summarizing and paraphrasing questions into assignments they were already giving their students to assess reading comprehension and writing fluency. So that was a very easy outcome measure to embed in their existing assignments. So that was approximately 14 minutes and 57 seconds of me talking at you. So now, let's just do a little bit of group practice in anticipation of our breakouts. So we are here because we want to increase rural first-generation college students' persistence in STEM. And the driver we're focusing on is improving rural first-generation students' deep sense of belonging in a STEM community of practice and self-efficacy in their STEM abilities. And we're going to dive into some of the core components in just a little while. Yet I wanted to put them up here for just reflection. And I'd like to now just practice as a group, and we can use the chat for this idea. So one change idea that has been floated is the idea of giving students in their immersive experiences some recreation time to form as a student community. So what are some ideas in the chat that you might have for what might be some process measures that we could use to assess the process of this change idea?
Or people could unmute if they want.
So Erica said, how many recreation sessions do we have? So number of recreation sessions offered. That's a lovely process measure, and that should be something very easy to collect. And then Mike said, is everyone participating? So yeah, number of students I can spell really. And you could even add, and in which sessions. So were some sessions more well attended than others? Do students communicate? Okay, so how students interact during sessions. So yeah, all of those are great process measures. And as we can see, not rocket science. Love it. What might some outcome measures be? So did the group talk to each other after the program is over? Okay, so lasting communications between students after program. What driver was this trying to support? So it was trying to support the sense of community of practice and the idea of building community among STEM students. Okay. Let's see, Sue Ann is saying equity of engagement, so gender-based engagement. And let's see, Ida says, could one be, do they engage in bringing more students into the community? Okay, so we could do, I like that idea. So engaging students outside of the activity. So do those who participated in the activity, is there a sense of community impact outside of that? Excellent, like these are all excellent brainstorms. And then we have just another minute or two, and let's just practice these PDSA skills again. So another change idea was having first two student leaders do some recruitment phone calls. The idea being that might increase participation and engagement in these immersive activities, immersive experiences. So what might a process measure be for student leaders doing recruitment phone calls? Okay.
Number of calls.
Number of calls. So number of phone calls. Yeah. Are the calls actually being made? Did we do what we said we were going to do? Response rate. So I like the idea of response rate. I might put that as an outcome measure. Response rate of student calls versus faculty calls. I think that's a lovely idea. Number of students contacted. That's another great process. How many students answer the phone, right? And do they answer? I think that's, is it even effective? Love that idea. What might some outcome measures be? We already have one. I like the idea of the response rate. Number of applications, right? I like that idea. Yeah. Call response versus participation response. Lovely. Do applicants indicate the student call? Oh, how did you find out about us? Great. So all lovely ideas. And, and again, I know I just gave you a lot of words in a short period of time. Hopefully this very quick brainstorm activity has, shown you that, again, measurement, not rocket science. It's about disciplined inquiry and setting an intention of what you want to measure, and then making sure you do a good job of measuring them. So without further ado, I will pass it back to Debbie.